Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual program at the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Clara Jeffrey. I'm editor-in-chief of Mother Jones Magazine, and I'll be moderating today's program. We'd like to thank our members, donors, and supporters for making this and all our other programs possible, and we hope that you guys and others will follow their example to support the club during these uncertain times. Today, I'm joined by Brian Stelter, CNN's chief media correspondent and author of the best-selling new book,
Hey.
Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth. Since the start of Trump's candidacy back in 2005, the symbiotic relationship between him and Fox News has been one of the most defining aspects of his rise to power. Together, they've broken previously accepted cultural and political norms and upended the truth of what truth means in America. Through painstaking investigative work and countless interviews, really just so many interviews, Brian documents how Fox and Friends, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and the whole gang on the network willfully spread Trump's lies, smear his enemies, and give his base an echo chamber. As one producer tells Brian in Hoax, we really don't believe all this stuff. We just tell other people to believe it. We'll be discussing a lot in the next hour. There's been a lot of breaking media news in the past day. And if you're watching along with us, please put any questions in the text chat on YouTube or comments on Facebook, and we'll incorporate them later in the program. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us.
Thank you. How are you and yours doing? I'm here in New York where I can actually see the sun. So how are you doing?
I think we're all kind of having a little bit of existential dread at these apocalypse now skies, but hanging in there as best we can.
Yeah. If it's not one thing, it's the next. If it's not one disaster, it's another disaster. How many days are left in 2020? I guess is the big question.
Can't end soon enough. I think. You say that Hoax essentially is about the Foxification of Trump and the Trumpification of Fox. Who leads this dance, the president or the network?
I've had to try to reckon with this question because it's a complicated one, and it's hard to know where Trump ends and where Fox begins and vice versa. But I think it is largely Fox driven, meaning Fox sets the agenda. Fox comes up with the day's narrative or the day's talking points, and the president reacts to that. And there are hundreds of examples of him reacting to what he sees on Fox and Friends in the morning, or freaking out about something he hears on a newscast, or cheering for something that Sean Hannity says at night. And those are mostly visible on his Twitter feed, right? A lot of this is out in the public record. But in addition to that, I had many sources at Fox talk to me about the network's influence behind the scenes as well. What they hear internally about Trump's obsession with the network. Some people are proud of it, but many other people are horrified by it. And even top executives at Fox said to me in confidence, we wish he'd watch less TV. We wish he would turn the channel, which is a wild thing to hear someone say.
I think all of us are way too much have seen how he reacts and tweets things out, as you say. But I think what was really interesting about your book is that it's the much broader parts of his agenda that are being set by Fox. And you seem pretty lit on fire by his reaction to COVID and how that too was shaped by Fox. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Right. Well, that is why the book is called Hoax. It would have been named Wingmen. We had talked about Sean Hannity and others as Fox's wingmen, as Trump's wingmen. I'm going to probably mix them up a couple more times tonight. The idea that he has all these wingmen on Fox. But when the pandemic broke everything, upended everything, and Trump used the word hoax once and Sean Hannity used the word once, it was pretty clear this is the most haunting example yet of how the president's unreality and Fox's unreality has life and death consequences. I am glad that Hoax came out a couple weeks before Bob Woodward's book. We both have these one-word titles. His is Rage, mine is Hoax. They do make for a great pairing, and I'm not saying that as a sales pitch, but I think what Woodward has done is what we've heard about today is we've heard this new information from Trump himself, from inside the White House. When you pair that with what Fox was saying at the time and what he was hearing from Fox, you get a really clear understanding of why the country was so misled why there was so much downplaying of the disease in February and March. Partly Trump's fault, partly Fox's fault. Obviously, there's other blame to go around, mayors and governors, et cetera. But Trump had the biggest platform in the country, and Fox had the biggest platform on cable. And now that we have these clips of Trump talking early February about the disease in a much more serious way than he was talking on Fox, Claire, I think we need to hear from people at Fox about this. Sean Hannity and others who were on the phone with Trump being misled in front of millions of viewers.
Well, that's interesting because, the central revelation of Woodward's book that came out today was that, in late-ish February, Trump was taking it very seriously, knew how deadly it was, knew that it was aerosolized, knew all the things that he would deny for months to come or downplay for months to come, all the things that go into mask wearing and sheltering in place.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, imagine that you would have to really study Woodward's book, and probably even you have not had the chance to do that yet. But would your supposition be that he kind of started there and was talked into a more treacherous place by Fox vis-a-vis COVID response? Or
right.
is it just that he can't kind of, keep something in his head for very long?
Right. Well, part of it is that every day is a new show. Every day is a new episode. And he programs it. It seems to program it that way. Certainly Fox programs his presidency that way. The only narratives that stay for more than a day are the Russia hoax and these other lies about news. But I quote Trump in the very beginning, the epigraph of the book, saying, and this is about COVID, "It will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away." That was March 10th, when there were other there were thousands of people sick already in Washington State and California and New York. And he was in denial about that publicly. So you're right that I think there are still some unanswered questions of, did he change his tune in privately to match what he was saying publicly or not? Either way, what we know is that February was a lost month, that Trump was behind the curve in a way that was dangerous, and that Fox was behind the curve in a way that was dangerous. And I'm grateful to Simon & Schuster that I was able to rip up the book and rewrite the first 25, 30 pages, rewrite the last add 40 more pages at the end to capture this, because it is sadly the best example of how this Fox-Trump feedback loop can have dangerous consequences.
Do you imagine that when you kind of contemplate that shift in his rhetoric, that it's about him wanting to look good, or a shifting idea of reality? He's saying now that he wants to be the best salesman. He didn't want people to panic, that this was about controlling public sentiment in that way, that, so there wouldn't be, a run on supermarkets more than there was. But that doesn't really square with your reporting on his demeanor about COVID issues and other issues, what his sort of central concerns were vis-a-vis perception of him.
Right. I've been thinking about this today. I think it's quite possible that Trump is taking in this information from O'Brien and other officials. He's being told how dangerous this disease is. He's being told it's much worse than the flu. He's being told that it spreads in the air. And then he also decides to focus on the post-impeachment purge, and decides to instead play to his base and make his folks feel better by firing individuals that testified against him in the Ukraine scheme, and by cheering on Roger Stone. That was what mid-February was about. It's what we thought the mid-February was about. It was about this post-impeachment revenge tour. It was about bringing back the band together, bringing Hope Hicks back from Fox Corporation back to the White House. Rick Grinnell over to the intel agencies. That's what was publicly happening in February. He was also holding public events, by the way, even though he'd been told of the danger of the disease. All of that timeline, it was damning in February and March, but it's so much more damning now, 6 months later and 190,000 lives later. When I reproduced the Fox Trump timeline for February and March, there are quotes that were obviously embarrassing at the time. People saying, "Now's the best time to fly," and the media, this is all media hysteria. Like, we knew that was foolish in March, but it sounds even worse now in retrospect. By the way, I'm here at CNN in New York. I'm in my office where I rarely am these days because of the pandemic, and the lights have turned off because nobody's in the building. And so the automatic light sensors have decided that I'm in the dark. I mean, what a metaphor. You've got your issues in the sky there. And, here at CNN, I come into the office and I typically see only two people when I come in. Most of our anchors are here doing their programs instead of working from home. But, we don't interact with anybody. We go into our robotic camera controlled rooms. We talk to the camera and that's it. And it's been 6 months. And the president, meanwhile, is holding rallies, acting like there is no virus, not having social distancing, not having any of those protections. It's a really sad example of two Americas.
So this gets us to another question that kind of bubbled up in media Twitter today, which is people were very angry that Bob Woodward knew this back in February,
right,
and did not report it. And there was similar criticism on a lesser scale about Mike Schmidt's book, things that weren't really revealed or at least fully kind of articulated until he wrote his book. What do you think the journalistic ethics are about knowing things, and especially life and death issues, and keeping them from the public for so long?
I'm still chewing on this, so I'm going to give you only a partial answer. But I think Woodward's defense is notable. He just shared it with the Associated Press. He said, yeah, I had these quotes from Trump in February, but I didn't know how real they were. I didn't know if they checked out. I didn't know if he was exaggerating. I wanted to know if he was really told this by his aides. And it wasn't until May, he says, that he had confidence in the information. By that point, he said his goal was just to get this book out as fast as possible. So putting myself into Woodward's head for a moment, as someone who finished Hoax in mid-June, and then had to have that, 2-month wait, which actually was incredibly fast. Thank you, the publisher, for printing so quickly. What can seem like a short amount of time, right, can also feel like a very long amount of time. So if Woodward's working on this over the summer and he knows it's going to come out in September, I'm sure that in his mind, that feels like a really fast turnaround and a absolutely a responsible thing to do. But I can understand why the folks on the outside are looking at this saying, if he knew in February, why didn't you tell us by March? That, I think, presupposes, though, would anything have changed? Would there have been a consequence? And I don't know if there would have been. Do you think there would have been a consequence if these quotes had come out, let's say in May? Let's take May as a fair middle ground here. Would there have been a consequence for Trump? I don't know.
Well,
I think there wouldn't have been, but I'm happy to be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to know, but notably that would be right when states were deciding to open up, as we now know, too quickly. And there was this sort of rush to appease the sort of anti-mask folks and, the demonstrators in Michigan. So,
interesting.
Sadly, we don't have a time machine, but it could have.
I suppose I am more personally disturbed by what Trump was saying publicly at that time, in February, in March. Contradicting health officials, showing up at events without any protection or social distancing, almost gleefully rejecting the best practices and advice given out by his government. And that was all in front of our eyes. So I guess count me down as a skeptic that knowing what he was saying privately would have changed minds or would have made a big difference. But like I said, we're only a few hours into the story. I kind of want to reserve judgment and hear more from Woodward and hear more. I also think, by the way, we need to hear. So we've heard these quotes from Trump. What about these White House aides? Will the Democratic-led House call them in? Will the Democratic-led House pursue this further? I think that's an open question.
Will Jim Mattis repeat his quotes on camera?
Right. I think if I write in Hoax about my naivete in January of 2017, believing in Reince Priebus and Sean Spicer, who I thought was a relatively straight shooter, who would be one of those, one of those adults in the room. And I thought that because I knew him personally. And I had the same belief about Reince Priebus. And one by one, every individual in the Trump years disappoints you. And you say to someone like Hope Hicks, or you say to someone like Sean, why didn't you stop him when he called us the enemy? Why didn't you stop him? And what they say, they have these BS answers, right? They say, well, you're not the president. I'm not the president. He's the president. Yeah, but it's hurting him. You're letting him hurt himself as well as the country. And you get these mealy-mouthed answers. And I don't know if it's any different for the rest of the anonymous folks who are only being quoted secondhand, who don't seem to want to speak on their own voices. I don't know.
So let's talk about Fox in that dynamic. It seems like a central premise that in the book is that there was a paradigm shift within Fox in 2016, 2017, where they went from being, let's put it nicely, super feisty partisan operation to sort of full-blown disinformation enterprise. And was there a sort of aha moment for you when you realized that there had been that kind of switch?
Well, first of all, I bet that you slightly disagree with my portrayal of the first 20 years of Fox News, where I say it was conservative, but not usually conspiratorial. And I would also add to that, look, Glenn Beck and others were pretty outrageous and extreme and conspiratorial in the pre-Trump years. So I don't mean to totally gloss over some of the nuttiness that was airing on Fox pre-Trump. But I do see a distinction between those years and the Trump years, partly because Roger Ailes was in charge, partly because nobody was as addicted to Fox as Trump is now, meaning, Bush wasn't hanging on every word Fox said, and partly because there weren't these perverse incentive structures to appeal to Trump in the way that there are now. So because Bush wasn't hanging on every word that Bill O'Reilly said, O'Reilly wasn't kind of trying to program his show for George W. Bush. And certainly Keith Olbermann on MSNBC wasn't programming for Barack Obama. That's one of the key differences now in the de-evolution of Fox.
But you anticipated my critique, which is
yes.
that they were indulging in sort of vituperative white grievance politics all throughout the Obama era. They did kind of carry a lot of water and misinformation about WMDs. So to your mind, the switch is that the politicians were more directly plugged into the almost hourly messaging from Fox hosts?
I think that is one of the big differences. I think another difference is that Ailes wasn't there to, in some ways, control the content. Look, we're going to talk about Ailes, and we're going to acknowledge that he was a sexual predator and a person who abused his power. He did, however, rein in his talent when necessary. For example, on the subject of birtherism, Ailes was a birther, but didn't let his talent go full birther. And, if we were in a similar dynamic now, and in some cases we are, when we're going after Kamala, when they're going after Kamala Harris, there's no one to kind of try to restrain the talent. Doesn't seem like there's anyone who's capable of doing that. I think that's the difference. I think another difference is what's the right wing has changed, what the audience wants has changed. There's even less interest in news than there might have been 10 years ago. And there are fewer people at Fox providing that news.
Do you think that there is or has been an entity kind of equal to Fox on the left in willingness to warp the truth, as well as, at least some measure of market share?
I don't see anything like it. I think this is an example of asymmetric lying in the way that Trump lies a whole lot more than Joe Biden or any other Democratic politician. Frankly, Trump lies a lot more than most Republican politicians. Like, there's asymmetric lying going on, and that's true in media as well. When Fox and Friends starts its show every morning with violence in U.S. cities, sometimes running old video of old riots and old fires, there's no outlet on the left running months-old Trump gaffes and months-old Trump lies every day and leading their hours with those examples and hitting the same beat on the same drum every day. There's actually not, it doesn't seem to be, there's an audience for that performance, right? There is an audience for that performance on the right. There doesn't seem to be an audience for that performance on the left or in the middle or anywhere else on that spectrum.
Yeah, or if there is, it's sort of confined to Facebook groups and so forth, but it doesn't seem to really penetrate media organizations of,
It's not
any.
profitable. Yeah, it's not profitable. It's not a big commercial business. No one's going to make a big commercial business out of it, and that does make a huge difference.
And one of the reasons I asked is because in 2009, Obama called out Fox for being a misinformation machine, pretty poignantly for Obama in particular.
Mhm.
But many in the press, and I think to some extent yourself included, kind of frame that as like it's an attack from a president on the media. Is this the same as presidents attacking the media? How does that look in retrospect? That moment, and I think the sort of way that those who would critique Fox
Yeah.
aggressively then were often, particularly the political press, seen as either not savvy or partisan in their critique.
Right. I was just looking at my story about this from 2009. I wrote, attacking the news media is a time-honored White House tactic, but to an unusual degree, the Obama administration's narrowed its sights to one specific outlet, Fox News Channel, calling it part of the political opposition. And I described this relationship with Rupert and how he dealt with David Axelrod. I said that both sides see benefits in this feud, which was definitely true at the time. I think in 2009, that story holds up because we had never seen a president like Trump come along and try to destroy outlets he didn't like. So at the time, this was an intense volley. Now, in retrospect, what the Obama aides were saying about Fox was, let's pick a term. It was so gentle. It was so polite compared to what the way that Trump talks about channels and outlets he doesn't like. So, I guess we'd have to draw a line, right? Like pre-2016, post-2016. Pre-2016, it was disturbing to a lot of White House reporters and DC professionals to see Fox being singled out by the administration. In retrospect, that was the calm before the storm. And
now they've all been booted to make way for ONN.
And I think what you're getting at also is why is there this defense of Fox when it is a political operation as well as a news operation? It is a outlet that produces journalism, but is really hostile to journalism. I had people at Fox describe it to me as a place that's about anti-journalism, right? And an anchor there said to me, "You can produce journalism here, but what are the incentives? What are the motivations to do that? It's easier and more rewarded just to talk about the news and to defend Trump and attack Biden." But I think in 2009, 2010, I think in the Obama years, to some degree even now, there is this desire to say we are united, and attack on one is an attack on all. And I think that's some of what was going on in the Obama years in the defense of Fox, to say you cannot pick off one of us from the herd. Aggressive coverage is a good thing. News outlets that are a pain in your side, that's your problem, not ours. I think those are understandable instincts, but in light of what has happened, and in light of Sean Hannity saying every night, journalism's dead, the media is fake, don't trust any of the media mob, they hate you, they hate us. That rhetoric is so deeply damaging. And if you don't watch every night, you don't get a sense of how poisonous it is and how powerful it is.
So Trump is, I think, we would all agree, an extremely lazy president. But he's put in time studying cable news and Fox in particular. What were his insights?
2011, he gets a weekly call-in show on Fox and Friends, and I think that was ultimately more important to his election victory than The Apprentice, because The Apprentice did set him up as a businessman and portrayed him to viewers as a really successful billionaire businessman, contrary to what we know. But Fox and Friends taught him about the GOP, taught him about what Fox's priorities were, which are, there is a distinction between GOP priorities and Fox priorities, but they often overlap. It taught him about what Fox viewers want, how they react, what they crave, what they like to hear. I think of it as almost a job interview. I don't think I called it that in the book, but you call in once a week, you ask a bunch of questions about the stories Fox is really hot on, and you have to figure out ways to answer. And in retrospect, it was a bit of a job interview. It introduced him to Fox and to GOP voters in a way that other candidates didn't have. Yes, Ben Carson, a couple others were Fox commentators, so they had similar connections, but he was calling in in this way that made him seem so important. He was only on the he was usually on the phone, even though he was like, a few blocks away in Trump Tower and he could have walked over. He's on the phone. He seems busy and important and hard to reach, powerful, mysterious. I don't think any of this was that intentional by Trump. He just, he wanted publicity and airtime. But the result of it is very clear. And of course, once he enters the race, Ailes said you can't call in anymore. The segment's over. But then he starts to call in as a candidate. Right now, he's a newsmaker. Yeah. Now the segments are actually now he's news, and he's calling in even more often. And by then, he knows what Fox wants. There was this great moment on the day that Trump entered the race where Greg Gutfeld, one of these Fox, comedian types, he says, "Wow, Trump's speech. He did the Fives rundown. He did our show's rundown. He did all the topics that we do every day." And that was the early sign right there that Trump was the Fox News candidate and would become the Fox News president. I might jump up and down to turn the lights on. Is that okay?
Yeah,
sure. Wave my arms wildly and see if I can turn the sensors on. Okay. He's going to look kind of kooky, but sorry, go ahead. It's not working anymore.
At that point, when he was starting to call into Fox and Friends, had Fox itself already become such an insular audience base? Like you refer to it as people who see it as the home team. They don't watch other television news. They don't really get their news much from anything else, maybe some talk radio. So in this, how did Trump graft himself onto that audience? Like, which came first? The cult of Trump or the cult of Fox, I guess.
Well, I think the Fox base was there first. Yeah, the Fox base is there first, and then it becomes the Trump base with enormous amounts of overlap and not much difference in between. But I would say there are different kinds of Fox viewers in the same way there are different kinds of Trump rally goers. I remember going to one of Trump's rallies in North Carolina in 2018 and noticing the difference between the huge, the true loyalists who are in the front row. They are singing his songs. They are rock star groupies. And then you got folks in the back sitting up in the bleachers who might leave early, kind of skeptical. They want to see the show, but they're not going to go in a Trump boat parade. Right. And I think there is a distinction in Fox as well. Different kinds of viewers, how loyal they are both to Fox and to Trump. Some who are holding their nose with regards to the hateful tweets and the racist rhetoric. Others who are absolutely all in, who are watching Fox all day. When a news anchor like Shep Smith, who left, or some of the news anchors who are still there, when those news anchors point out Trump's lies or call out the indecency, even gently, then they start sending hate mail and hate tweets to the Fox anchors. So you get that really loyal base. Those are the front row folks at the rallies.
My question adjacent to that, which is also part of the evolution of TV news and maybe broadly. Analyst panels instead of reporting, a kind of premium on opinion and fights rather than reported segments or more shows. And so I wonder what you think about not just Fox, it's that way.
Right. And I think this is true. You're right. It's not just about Fox. It's a broader phenomenon in television. I think a lot of the change we've seen in television news from reporting to talking about the news, talking about the reporting, I believe that's largely been driven by the internet and by smartphones. Because when you have every headline on your phone, you have access to every bit of information at all times. I think it forces television producers to think differently and produce differently and not produce a headline news hour, but instead to go deep on a few stories, especially politics, because there's an obsession with politics and the country is so polarized. So I view it as a reaction to the internet and to phones, and this is the famous example with CNN is the missing airline in 2014 and CNN's choice to go all in almost 24/7 covering the missing airliner. To me, in retrospect, that was really a reaction to these market forces that's moved all the news onto the internet and made TV have to seek a different model. But, there are outlets that are trying a kind of more old-fashioned headline service. News Nation is a primetime show that just launched on WGN America on cable. It's it's a multi-hour newscast. The whole pitch for this newscast is just the news, no opinion. So that's going to be an interesting test in the marketplace to see how many folks want that versus a more point of view driven, more commentator driven point of view version. I've been covering Fox 16 years. So I started in 2004 with a blog called TV Newser, where I was just obsessively tracking CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and the cable news wars. It was an innocent time compared to what we're experiencing now, where these networks were they were powerful. Fox's ratings were high, but not as high as they are now, and the content wasn't, I think, as conspiratorial. So I've been covering Fox since then. And in the Trump years, what was starting to be different to me in my conversations with sources, lower level sources, higher level sources, anchors, production assistants, everyone in between, was this growing sense of alarm about the network's content, this growing sense of people saying things like, the network has gone off the rails. I knew when I joined it had a conservative bent, but we were much more reality-based 10 years ago or 5 years ago than we are now. And this was clear enough to me by mid-2018 into 2019 that there was a bigger story here. I think ultimately what compelled me to write the book was this sense of all of these sources inside Fox saying, something's gone wrong. We've become way too Trumpy. The incentives are all wrong. They are to misinform instead of inform. And I know some people would say they don't have sympathy for those staffers. They should leave. And indeed, some have. I quote a researcher in the book named Sean Graff, who reached out to me when he was still working at Fox in New York. He spoke to me on the record, which is certainly a risk for his job. And he said, Fox's allegiance to President Trump puts our democracy at risk. He ultimately did leave, and now he's working for another network. But others stay. They think they can make the content better, they can make the place better. And that dynamic is something that I think is really interesting about, can Fox be improved? Can the content be improved? Can the quality be improved so that people aren't being fed resentment news and grievance politics all the time? Now, of course, the counter to that, and I'll go back to you, Claire, I think you're back up, is that's what the audience wants. The audience doesn't want news. It wants pro-Trump propaganda. And the ratings show that. Viewers turn the channel when the news comes on, and they turn it back to Fox when the opinion comes on. Claire, can you hear me?
I can certainly hear you. Yes. Thank you for
sounds much better.
Answering my question, filling in. Yeah. So they do say that. Is there any evidence that these folks who are staying there, particularly now that some of the sort of biggest names like Shep Smith, who are in that more sort of straight news category, that those who remain are doing anything and providing a fig leaf? I mean, there was a really interesting example last week where a very good reporter on national security issues confirmed a big story about Trump, calling the troops losers and slackers. Mm-hmm. And it may have made it on the air in other programs, but it mostly made it on the air because Pete Buttigieg mentioned it when he appeared in an opinion show. So even though her reporting confirmed that story, if they're not airing it, what difference does it make?
I think CNN might have talked about her reporting more than Fox talked about her reporting. And that's at the heart of the problem. There's nobody in a position of leadership at Fox who says, our reporter got a great tip. She confirmed a really important piece of information. This is the priority now. She's going to be on at 3 and at 5 and at 7 and at 9. Instead, these shows are like fiefdoms. And the producers and the stars, they want to please this Trump-loving audience. It is why, and I hate to say this word, but this word came up repeatedly in the reporting from sources at Fox who talk about it like a cult. In the same way that you've got critics of Trump who say Trump supports like a cult. You have folks at Fox who feel that word applies. And so in that environment, Jennifer Griffin's reporting is something to be feared as opposed to reported and shared and spread. It is something to be rejected. And that is largely what happened at Fox. Trump's denial was taken more seriously, 20,000 misleading statements later, than their own reporters' information. And that is incredibly demoralizing for the reporters inside Fox. It is why some of them leave, like Shep Smith, and a number of others have fled. Others say they look for other jobs and they can't really find them, and that's a tough situation when you don't feel like you have options. But this is a dynamic that I fear will only get more intense in the final weeks of the campaign.
When they have left, have they been replaced by journalists who have standards and are trying to report the news, or is that just sort of smoothed over and made way for more opinion or like less vibrant reporting?
Well, let's take 3 p.m. as an example. 3 p.m. Eastern time, noon Pacific is the Shep Smith's time slot. Shep was like the sorest of sore thumbs, pointing out lies and misinformation that were spreading on Fox. So he would try to correct Tucker Carlson. He would try to correct Sean Hannity to limited avail because a lot of viewers didn't like that and didn't like him. But when he left last October, he was replaced by Bill Hemmer. Bill is, as one of the sources in Hoax says, he's a don't rock the boat type of newsman. Well, if any time in history of our living history required some boat rocking, this is the time to rock the boat, especially when you're on Fox and you have the president's ear and you're influencing the Trump audience. But no, he's a don't rock the boat guy. He's not doing the kind of fact checks that Shep was doing. So in that way, the 3 p.m. hour, the noon hour Pacific time became Trumpier. It's another example of that move toward these perverse incentives, which are not to report the news fearlessly, but to fear the news.
And for, say, a Chris Wallace or Brett Baier, you report that they view it much like GOP senators who say they don't read the tweets. They like claim they don't watch the other shows. They just, how does that square with just the existing at that network and in the larger media ecosystem?
Yeah, I think Chris Wallace is the exception to the rule. There's a couple other exceptions to the rule, but the rule is very strict and very clear. And the fact that there are a couple exceptions just supports it further. He has a lot of autonomy. He's on once a week, Sunday morning on Fox Broadcast, and then re-aired on Fox News. So he's a man with an island, and nobody else really has that island. In fact, anchors at Fox said to me things like, we don't have any power. We don't feel we have power to fact check Trump. We feel like we're being squeezed out by propaganda. This is a subject of immense frustration there because, you and I may disagree on this, but I think there should be a vibrant, healthy ecosystem for right-leaning news. Like, I think there should be absolutely, beat reporters who are covering stories from a conservative perspective. We need more reporting in the world, not less. But that's not what Fox is doing, right? What they're doing is they're shouting down the rest of the news. You've got Greg Gutfeld on air tonight saying this story, this bombshell from Bob Woodward, it's not a bombshell, it's a booger, right? So he's just resorting to childish insults and name calling and silly rhetoric, right? In some ways, people like Hannity, they're not newsmen, they're stop the newsmen. So the model that I'm saying we should have a healthy, diverse media ecosystem, lots of reporting from lots of points of views. We're not getting that reporting from Fox. We're getting more and more propaganda.
So you say in the book that after Ailes left and then later died, that Rupert Murdoch stepped in for a while to run the show. But then after a while, when these former deputies of Ailes kind of took over things, Murdochs themselves stepped back. The hosts gained the upper hand, and essentially the inmates are running the asylum. Like, nobody can tell Hannity what to do or not do. He tapes the show for impeachment night, which is
yes.
remarkable. And I'm curious what your analysis of why the Murdochs either can't or won't or don't step in. Is there just nothing in it for them? It's minting them money, so what do they care?
That is essentially the explanation I was given several times. People would say it a little more gingerly. They would say things like, well, Lachlan Murdoch, he's a soccer dad at heart. He doesn't care that much about Fox News. He's not a religious Fox News viewer. He cares about the business. He cares about making deals. He wants to grow the empire and go off and buy startups. That's great, Lachlan. Go do that. Make sure someone's watching the channel 24 hours a day so they don't hurt the viewers, right? Go do what you got to do. Make sure the channel's okay first. He was trying to do a deal for a service called Tubi in February and March. That was his priority when the pandemic was when this disease was silently spreading in the US and we didn't know it because we didn't have tests. And, they canceled Rupert Murdoch's birthday party in March because they knew it wasn't a good idea. So they were taking these kind of precautionary measures personally, but not making sure that Sean Hannity didn't call it a hoax on TV. Now, of course, he said hoax. He meant the Democrats are committing a hoax. They're too obsessed with the virus, right? They're politicizing this. They're trying to hurt Trump. That was what he said. So they were talking about it on Fox like it was a political crisis. when in fact it was a medical crisis. And there hasn't been accountability for that. And there never will be. The truth is, there never will be at Fox. The Murdochs are never going to come out and express regret or something like that. But at the end of the day, it is about that profit machine. It is about that focus on the bottom line instead of the content and the editorial. That came through loud and clear in my interviews. And I'll tell you the way it comes through, the way it's presented as a positive, right? Because there's a little bit of a spin to this that is interesting. The pro-Murdoch spin, just for what it's worth, is we give our stars autonomy. We give our talent freedom. They are free. They have freedom of speech. It is their show, right? They have control. We love hearing that. I'm a TV host. I got autonomy. I'm happy to have autonomy. The difference is when I'm going to go on the air and say something that I know is that might ruffle feathers. I have my producer read it first, right? I have my wife read it first. I might have an executive read it first, not because they're going to censor it, not going to soften it. Oftentimes the feedback is to make it even stronger and really tell the truth, right? But that doesn't seem to happen at Fox.
Well,
there doesn't seem that those checks and balances don't seem to exist.
You say there's essentially no standards and practices department at Fox, which for people who don't know as much as you about TV news is essentially, editors, lawyers, and fact checkers designed to be a team to make things bulletproof for legal reasons as well as just ethics. So how do they avoid getting sued?
That's interesting. In the Seth Rich case, there is litigation ongoing. Fox has won some of those battles in court. I think they've lost others. Rolling Stone had a great piece on this recently that I'd recommend on the Seth Rich case. It's an interesting question. There was a case in Washington State that attempted to litigate on the coronavirus pandemic downplaying and was swiftly thrown out. I think that's a credit to Fox's lawyers more than anything else, high-priced lawyers. That's an interesting question. I haven't thought that through fully. The lack of checks and balances and standards and practices is a big deal, though. And I tried to really focus on that in Hoax because I don't think it's well known outside Fox or outside media world circles. When I have a story, it's going to go a sensitive story or something anonymously sourced. It's going to go through a process in the same way that you do with your staff at Mother Jones. At Fox, if you want to have a process, you can, but it's not enforced. It's not a company-wide thing. On Brett Baer's show, there is a little bit of a process, but that's just his choice to have that. There's not that same top-down sort of determination to have vetting and quality control.
There seems to be less of this now, but I still wonder why political operatives of either party are put on analyst panels along with journalists and other experts. I mean, we know what they're going to say. Like, what's the point? Like, I don't need to, I know what Jeffrey Lord or Kelly McEnany or Donna Brazile is going to say. Like, what is the point of that?
I think that's a fair criticism, and I know I've been guilty of it myself in the past. And I agree with you. There's less of it now, partly because of the soul searching we're talking about, and frankly, constructive criticism helps a lot and is heard and is taken seriously. I think thankfully we're moving away from this food fight approach. On multiple channels, there's less of this left, right, you guys go fight for 5 minutes sort of format, partly because the stakes are so high and the lies are so suffocating. But I know in dare I say in defense of Kayleigh McEnany, when I would have her on as a panelist in 2016, I do think that she was able to reflect some of what Trump world was thinking, some of how stories were perceived by Trump supporters. And I do see there's value in that, but I think the greater value would be just to go interview supporters, right? Go and do the reporting, go and do the field work. And while we're at it, while we're interviewing Trump supporters, let's make sure we interview lots of Democrats and let's make sure we interview lots of non-voters, because I think that's the even more interesting part of the story. If I could replace half the Trump voter in a diner stories with stories about non-voters, then I think we're going to get somewhere interesting.
So we all saw that very Mussolini, Kimberly Guilfoyle speech at the GOP convention. Since you're talking to a largely Californian audience, she has a special fascination for us.
Oh, yeah, yes, she does.
Used to be married to Governor Gavin Newsom. What do you think her tenure at Fox tells us about Fox? I mean, obviously it tells us something about the revolving door to the Trump world. But you had some really interesting observations about her role at the network, particularly in the aftermath of Ailes' scandal.
Right. Look, day one, Trump comes down the escalator and she says, it was like the Lego movie. The theme was everything is awesome. I really felt so excited. I felt richer just listening to him. Like she was on board the Trump train before it left the station. At the same time, I had a Fox insider who knows Kimberly well say to me, she's an avatar. If MSNBC offered her a better gig with more money, she'd be a raging liberal. Now, she claims she's always been a registered Republican, but I think there's that dynamic in cable news, especially at Fox, where it feels like these folks are only cheering for the side they're cheering on for financial reasons or personal fame and popularity reasons. But she clearly saw, she made a series of calculations. One was to be pro-Trump. Another was to be pro-Ailes in the summer of 2016 when Ailes was sued by Gretchen Carlson. And that was a terrible bet that she made. I think it's pretty clear what the calculus was. If she was the head of Team Roger, she'd get rewarded with a promotion, a new show, and her time slot of her own. She wouldn't be stuck on some panel with 4 other people. She'd have her own show. She'd be a bigger star. She went around Fox saying things like, Dana Perino, she's dead. She won't support Roger Ailes. You can have her seat on the 5. Like she went around trying to make deals with people in that way. And that, again, that speaks to that kind of professional aspiration, that attempt to get ahead. Clearly, it backfired. Once Ailes was forced out, her star faded fast. Fox waited a while to until her contract ran out for her to have her leave, but eventually had her leave. And now, now she's on YouTube, right, doing Trump 2020 web videos that almost no one watches. I think these videos, they deserve a little bit of attention because they can kind of show us what the attempt is by the Trump campaign to create their own media, but it's not working very well. And I had a Fox insider say to me, when Don Jr. is on Fox, she sometimes comes with him, and we all kind of think it's a little desperate, that she wants to get back in the building. So I guess the point here is there's no love lost between Kimberly Guilfoyle and the folks at Fox.
Are Fox hosts starting to play footsie with QAnon?
They are, and that's one of the scariest things that's happened in recent weeks and recent months. Jesse Waters, for example, was on the air, and I want to get the direct quote because it's worse than I could paraphrase. He basically went on and said, QAnon, they've had some crazy stuff, and he was referring to Pizzagate, for example. But he said, Q can do some crazy stuff with the pizza stuff and the Wayfair stuff, but they've also uncovered a lot of great stuff when it comes to Epstein and when it comes to the deep state. Now, this happened on Saturday night, and I requested comment from Fox right away, and Fox didn't say anything all day Sunday. Then finally, Sunday night, they put out a statement from Jesse where he said, I don't believe in QAnon. My comment should not be mistaken for giving credence to this fringe platform. Well, when you're talking about on Fox, it's not a fringe platform anymore. When President Trump is retweeting QAnon memes, it is not a fringe platform anymore. That's the definition of mainstream. And this will be, again, another test for Fox leadership. Will they try to make sure that this kind of toxicity doesn't spread on their own airwaves?
What happens to Fox if Trump loses? The business model at the moment seems completely tied into him now.
What do you think? I think Fox is bigger than Trump at this point. And yes, he can go off and try to launch a channel. He can go off and have a Twitter fight with somebody if he loses re-election. But I think Fox is bigger than Trump at this point. And it's better to be, for Fox, the business model is better to be anti-Democrat than pro-Trump. It's better to be the anti-Biden channel and have something you're against than have to be for Trump. Think about today, right? You've got the Atlantic article, and now you have these quotes from Bob Woodward's book, just a deluge of bad news for the president. And you have to go on and put on a happy face and tell everybody everything's great and that Trump's going to win re-election. That's not an easy job. So simply from a practical standpoint, being the anti-Biden channel is sometimes maybe a better, that's a more comfortable position for Fox to be in.
I can see that, but it seems like Trump's fans have, his core fans are so devoted to him in a way that they may not abandon Fox, but I guess I wonder what you think will happen to them, because, when cults and the really violent sometimes and sort of distressing realizations. I mean, it's uncomfortable to put your whole faith into something that then falls apart in one way or another.
Well, won't the, I mean, we're in kind of hypothetical territory. What comes into what does December look like? Okay, what does February look like? But maybe it looks like this: Biden wins, and the narrative is the deep state won. The deep state took down our guy, right? One of the things about Fox is the primetime stars, they distill really complicated, nuanced things into these talking points, into these slogans that are then they become the way we all talk about these stories, for better or for worse. Hoax and deep state, I think it's quite likely it'll just be a deep state plot. This was a deep state plot. It'll be interesting to see how many people accept the results of the election and believe the results of the election. What I don't think will happen is I don't think people wake up and say, Trump who? I don't think there's going to be that sort of dismissal of him, running away from him. If anything, I think the core Fox viewer will hold Trump more tightly, right? And turn to Trump Jr. as the future.
Brian, all the networks, particularly CNN and MSNBC, I guess, have had to roll with the pandemic, and it's forced some big changes to the way that shows are produced, booked. And some of these seem decidedly me in a studio and almost all the guests in New York. Do you think, is there appetite at the networks for this to remain once there's a vaccine?
For what? For the working from home studios, that sort of thing? I don't know. I might have lost it for a minute.
Well, the working from home studios for people who are employed by CNN, but I think also just interviewing people more broadly across the country.
Right. Well, I certainly hope so. And I do think this will be a lasting impact. I am frustrated today by the relative lack of national news coverage of the fires. I know there is some great coverage from national outlets. I'm curious to look at the nightly newscast, 6:30 Eastern, and see what the order of stories was and how high the fires ranked. And I think that one silver lining of this crisis has been that it is easier to pipe into anybody anywhere. You can get folks at home. They can come on the webcam. They're able to join from anywhere. I do think that's going to have a lasting impact on TV coverage and hopefully provide more diversity and more perspective in the coverage. So it's not that you have to get to a studio and you have to be in front of a camera with makeup and lights on, but that we can reach out to more experts that are in the field. I noticed an announcement earlier this week by CNN. One of our correspondents, Diane Gallagher, who's been in Washington, she's been in Atlanta. She's now going to be our first ever Charlotte, North Carolina correspondent. So she'll be there with her husband. Her husband already is in Charlotte. I think I'm pretty sure she's from the Carolinas. Now she'll be back. She'll be there. She will be Charlotte based. And so you could envision a model where CNN correspondents who used to be in 10 cities will soon be in 20 cities, right? Because they'll be able to be more spread out and they'll be able to work from home or work from, a kind of a small office setup or a small bureau setup. I think that would be a great benefit and a great improvement so that we can reflect more of what's going on across the country.
I'm holding it up and you can't see me. So
I'll hold it up. I'll hold it up from my darkened office.
For joining us today.
Copies
are available everywhere. I read it.
You did, in fact, and not only did you read it, you tweeted out your favorite passages. So I want to ask our viewers to do the same thing. I love seeing what stands out to you in the book, what paragraphs or pages stand out, what surprises you, what horrifies you. Let me know. And for everybody watching, if you have questions for me that we didn't answer today, my email address is bstelter@gmail.com, just first initial, last name @gmail.com. Most of all, thank you for your interest and thank you for tuning in.